Mandy Schloss was born in 1955 in New York. When she was 25, she moved to Alaska, where she graduated from the local medical school. The woman received a degree in psychiatry and got a job as a nurse at a Fairbanks hospital. True, most often she had to work on the road in remote areas of Alaska. Many people were unable to visit the hospital on their own, so Mandy and her colleagues traveled to them by a variety of transport, including boats and planes. She loved her work and approached it with maximum responsibility. At the same time, the woman lived almost 600 kilometers from the hospital, in the city of Anchorage. She traveled to work by plane and stayed at the hotel during the week, returning home only on weekends. It was August 2007. Mandy, 52 at the time, was back in Anchorage for the weekend and soon had to fly back to work. During her absence, she always asked her best friend Jerry to come to her house to feed the cat and give him the necessary medicine. On Saturday, August 4th, a friend called her to discuss the matter. However, Mandy never answered the phone. She hadn't managed to get through to her all day, and it was strange. Then Jerry contacted their mutual friend, but he also did not call Mandy that day. At first, Jerry thought that Mandy had gone somewhere on business, but she did not answer the call the next day. Then the friend decided to drive to her house. No one answered the knock on the door either, so Jerry used the spare key. At first glance, everything looked normal, the house was in order, there were no signs of a struggle or other evidence that anything bad had happened to Mandy. Only on the way out did Jerry notice something strange. The handle of the front door was loose, and the woman decided to tighten the screws with a screwdriver. After that, she went to work, never knowing where her friend had gone. On Monday, August 6th, Jerry called the hospital where Mandy worked. To her surprise, the woman never showed up at work, which was completely unusual for her. She also did not contact any of her colleagues to alert them of her absence. All this indicated that something could really happen to the woman, and Jerry decided to contact the police. The police department took a missing persons report, and Jerry and the detective headed back to Mandy's house. No signs of a break-in were found, and nothing valuable was missing from the house. This eliminated the possibility that a burglar had broken into the woman's house. Moreover, Mandy had some drugs at home that were distributed exclusively by prescription. Any robber would most likely take them, since they were in demand among people with drug addiction. When they entered the garage, they discovered that Mandy's car was missing. This was also very strange. The woman always went to the airport by taxi, and only used her car to travel around the city. The police concluded that something bad had indeed happened to the woman. A team of forensic scientists examined the house, trying to find any clues, but all this did not bring any results. At that time, the version of the abduction was unlikely. The police believed that Mindy might have suffered an accident. She often went out into nature, and the area in those parts was quite dangerous. People could become victims of wild animals or accidentally fall off a cliff. However, this version did not bring the police any closer to solving the case, and they decided to start searching for suspects who, in theory, could be involved in the disappearance. The first thing they did was check on Bob, a mutual friend of Mindy and Jerry. The man willingly cooperated with the investigation, and detectives quickly established that on the day of the woman's disappearance he was at work many kilometers from her home. As for the exact time of Mindy's disappearance, the police did not have a clear answer. The woman had not been in contact since Saturday. Having examined her computer, experts determined that the last time she used it was at 2:30 in the morning on the same day. Without any serious leads, the police decided to turn to the public for help. They posted leaflets around the city with information about the missing woman, and also distributed this information on local television channels. That same day, they started receiving calls from witnesses, but most of the leads led nowhere. People reported seeing Mindy in various places and even in other states. None of these leads were of any use. Meanwhile, Bob and his work colleagues decided to comb the area where Mindy might have gone. She quite often went into nature to pick berries or simply went there for a walk. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. Detectives decided to take a different route. They contacted the bank the woman used and asked to check if there had been any activity on her cards in recent days. And here they finally got a serious clue. Early on Sunday morning, the day after Mindy went missing, someone withdrew $500 from her debit card, the maximum amount available for withdrawal within 24 hours. The police immediately received a recording from the ATM camera from the bank, and they were greeted with a disturbing sight. It turned out that an unknown man had withdrawn the money. His face was covered with a bandana, so it was impossible to identify him. He lowered his bandana only after his face was out of the camera's view. In this regard, the police had no choice but to wait until this person tried to use someone else's card again. Meanwhile, detectives received another tip from Mindy's colleagues. They learned that the woman was planning to renovate her house and hired workers. At some point, she had a conflict with their manager over the cost of the work. Mindy later admitted to her colleagues that she was afraid of him because he behaved strangely during visits to her home. Police checked on the man, but he turned out to have an alibi for the day the woman disappeared. They also questioned another worker who came to her home on Friday around 7 p.m. The man also appeared not to be involved, and he could not remember anything suspicious that evening. Soon, detectives had a new lead. The bank's security service reported that early in the morning $500 had been withdrawn from Mindy's card again, this time from a different ATM. After studying the camera footage, the police immediately realized that it was the same man as the first time. However, there was something strange in the recording. The man withdrew money and left, but after a few seconds he returned to the ATM. He walked around it for a while, pressed buttons and ultimately left again, calling the bank. Detectives found out the reason for this strange behavior. The unknown person forgot to take out the card, and the ATM in this case takes it away to prevent theft. The real owner can get it back by contacting the bank with his ID. Of course, this option was not suitable for the criminal, so he lost access to the account. Mindy is not always. This time the police managed to find a witness. He drove up to the same ATM when an unknown man came out. According to the witness, he got on his bike and rode away. This was a significant clue since most people traveled by car or on foot. But all this information was still not enough to get closer to the solution, and detectives decided to interview all residents of the Mindy area. They asked people to remember any oddities or point out neighbors who were suspicious. To their surprise, many residents named one particular house located right next to Mindy's house. According to them, parties were constantly held there, residents were always making noise and disturbing public order. Detectives went there and found out that a fairly large number of people lived in the house. However, all of them were not eager to talk to the police. Then the detectives went to a woman who lived directly opposite the house. She said that she did not see anything suspicious, but her behavior showed that she was very nervous. The next day, the woman called the police station and asked detectives to meet, but not at her home. They met in another place, and the woman shared a terrible story. Shortly before the detectives' first visit, a man who lived in the house across the street came to see her. He said police were walking around the area and asked the woman not to tell them he lived there. When asked why, he stated that he was on parole and did not want the police to know his location. At night, a woman heard someone walking on the porch of her house. She looked out the window and saw that it was the same man. He stood still, looked into several windows and left. The woman was very scared and decided to tell the police about it. Detectives learned his name was Josh Wayne, who was 27 years old at the time. After running him through the database, they found out that 7 years ago the guy was tried for murder. Then he was accused of beating a woman to death, but the jury acquitted him. As a result, Josh was charged with tampering with evidence and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. After spending 3 years behind bars, he was released early. Detectives immediately identified him as the main suspect. After talking to his housemates, they found out that Josh did not have a car and he mostly got around by bicycle. There was just one problem. When the police started looking for him, the man disappeared without a trace. On Thursday, August 9th, the police suddenly got another lead. A local truck driver called them and said he spotted Mindy's car in a parking lot near the airport. He saw its photograph in the newspapers and immediately recognized this car. Detectives who arrived at the scene confirmed that the car was indeed Mindy's. They also noticed a security camera was pointed at the parking lot from a nearby building and requested recording. It showed how on August 4 at 12:30 a certain man drove this car into the parking lot, got out of it and wiped the door handle. Apparently, he erased his prints. Unfortunately, the quality of the recording did not allow us to see his face. Forensic experts examined the vehicle for any fingerprints or DNA traces and were able to recover some samples. However, they took time to study, and there was no guarantee that they would be useful in this matter. There was a purse on the passenger seat, which could indicate that the woman was in the car with the criminal, alive or dead. Having not received the desired result from using modern analysis tools, detectives decided to use search dogs. Few believed in the success of this idea, since a week had passed since Mindy's disappearance. However, for lack of other options, they still turned to dog handlers. The service dog was taken to the ATMs from which the unknown man was withdrawing money, as well as to Mindy's car. The dog took the scent and headed down the street towards the woman's house, located 3 blocks from that place. Sniffing at the front door, she went straight to the very house where Josh White had previously lived. The detectives, who until recently did not believe in the idea of a search dog, were shocked. The sniffer dog directly pointed out to them that Josh was in Mindy's car, near her house and near those ATMs. The next day, the police repeated this experiment with another search dog. The result was the same. The dog walked all this distance and stopped at Josh's house. Although this was not a smoking gun that would work quickly in court, detectives decided not to waste time and obtained an arrest warrant for the suspect. They headed to his house, but the man had not appeared there for several days. During a search in the building, they found the same jacket that the unknown man was wearing on cameras near the ATMs, and in his pocket was a receipt for withdrawing cash from Mindy's card. Next, they discovered a woman's gold watch and immediately showed it to Jerry. The woman confirmed that the watch belonged to Mindy. Experts were able to compare DNA samples found on the steering wheel of Mindy's car with samples from items from Josh's house, and they were a match. This indicated that Josh was in the missing woman's car. This evidence was already much more serious, and the police concentrated all their efforts on capturing the suspect. Flyers with his signs were posted all over the city and several billboards were even rented. Detectives say it was one of the largest manhunts in Alaska history. Almost all law enforcement officials were working on this issue, and local residents reported any suspicious evidence. At some point, police released photos from ATM cameras, and almost immediately they were contacted by a woman named Lisa. She said she had met Josh before and was sure it was him in the photo. Important here is the fact that the police did not name the main suspect. But what followed next became a turning point in this matter. Another of Josh's acquaintances contacted the police with a confession. For the past week, she has helped him get around the city, transporting him in her car. One day he left his backpack in the back seat, and the girl and her mother looked inside. There they found several more ATM receipts, as well as a phone. In the gallery, they found a photo of Josh allegedly holding a gun. For the police, this information only added to the alarm. Detectives were already worried that the suspect might attack someone else while they were looking for him, and thanks to his phone, it turned out that he was also armed. The police tried to convince his girlfriend to help them catch Josh. They wanted the girl to take the recorder with her and go with him to meet him, where she tried to get him to talk about what he did to Mindy, but the girl was too scared and refused. However, she soon had to participate in this matter against her own will. On September 2, Josh came to her house and began to demand his backpack in an aggressive manner. Considering that the girl gave it to the police, she had to come up with an excuse on the fly. Realizing that she did not have a backpack, Josh asked to take him somewhere far away to hide from the police, but the girl refused. Instead, she invited him to stay at her house, but Josh became suspicious and left. The girl realized that she would not be safe until the police caught this man, and she decided to quietly follow him in her car, calling detectives along the way. At some point, Josh reached his friend's house and went inside. By that time, police, special forces and the FSB had already begun to converge on the scene. Everyone feared that the suspect would not surrender without a fight, and these fears were confirmed. Using a weapon, Josh took 2 people who were in the house with him hostage. A lawyer was invited to negotiate with him, who after a few hours managed to convince him to surrender. During interrogation, he practically did not speak to the police, but investigators were in no hurry to accuse him of Mandy's murder. At that time, they already believed that the woman was most likely dead, but without her body it would be extremely difficult to prove this, so Josh was only charged with stealing Mandy's bank card and watch. The FBI agent decided to use a trick. He listed the accusations to Josh, who said they were all lies. Then the investigator stated that they had evidence confirming that it was he who withdrew money from someone else's card, and Mandy herself went to the police to report the theft of the card. Hearing this, the suspect grinned and asked what games they were trying to play with him. From this reaction, the FBI agent was finally convinced that Josh had killed Mandy, but the police still had to find her body to charge Josh with murder. They had to work to cope with the weather in that area. The snow fell early, and they would have no chance of finding Mandy if her remains were swept away. On September 13, an electrician who worked near a city and village almost 100 kilometers from Anchorage called the police. He spotted a woman's body in a wooded area and immediately thought it was Mandy. Experts from the laboratory confirmed this. The deceased was indeed Mindy Schloss. As a result of the medical examination, it turned out that the woman received a bullet in the occipital region, and they tried to get rid of her remains by fire. After the bullet was recovered, it was determined that it had been fired from the same weapon that Josh was detained with. Now the police could only understand how the events that led to Mandy's death unfolded. Meanwhile, experts continued to examine every inch of her home, trying to detect any traces of Josh's presence. It was extremely difficult to do this. They had to collect almost every hair from the floor of Mandy's house, and then examine them in the laboratory. It took a month, but they were eventually able to locate a hair that belonged to Josh. DNA analysis confirmed this, and detectives now had evidence of the suspect's presence at the victim's home on May 18, 2008. 10 months after the murder, he was finally charged and the case went to trial. While gathering witnesses to testify against Josh, an interesting situation occurred. His ex-girlfriend Lisa, who identified him from a photo near an ATM, refused to testify in court. She regularly visited her ex-boyfriend in prison, and at one point the couple announced their intention to marry. Investigators were shocked by this turn of events, but they quickly realized what was behind this step. The US Constitution allows relatives not to testify against each other, and, apparently, Josh convinced Lisa to marry him precisely for these reasons. However, there was one problem. Soon after the marriage was concluded, it was declared invalid, since weddings with prisoners were prohibited by state law. But the detectives wondered why Josh was so keen to protect Lisa from interrogation and testimony. Is it really all about some photograph near the ATM, where his face is not even visible? Most likely, the girl knew much more. Investigators tried to get her to talk, but at first they were unsuccessful. However, at some point, Lisa herself contacted them and stated that Josh confessed to her about the murder during one of her visits to the prison. According to his story, there was a party at his house on Friday night. Josh, who had no means of support, decided to break into a neighboring house and steal something. This house turned out to be Mindy's place. Josh opened her door and began searching the house for valuables. At some point, Mindy came into the room, and he immediately realized that if he left her alive now, he would not be able to avoid prison. He didn't want to go there again, so he grabbed the woman, took her to the bathroom and tied her hands. Then the criminal went to his home, wrote it down and grabbed several things to steal. Before returning to Mindy's house, he put bags over his feet and secured them with tape so as not to leave any marks. Then he took the woman to the garage, put her in his own car and drove out of town. After an hour of driving, he stopped in a wooded area, took Mindy away from the road and killed her. Josh then returned to her house, cleaned up, vacuumed the carpet and left. The trial began only in the spring of 2009. The prosecution offered Josh a deal. He would confess to killing Mindy and another woman 7 years earlier in exchange for waiving the death penalty. Thus, the authorities hoped to close 2 high-profile cases at once, and Josh agreed. As a result, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison without parole. While reading the verdict, Josh cried, but at one point the situation escalated sharply when the judge called him a coward who decided the lives of 2 women. The criminal jumped up and shouted, "What about the men I killed?" At that moment, the lawyers grabbed him and forced him to remain silent before he said anything else. This cry haunted the detectives for 5 long years, until in 2014 Josh himself offered the authorities a new deal. He agreed to confess to killing 3 men if he was transferred from a local prison to a federal prison. Apparently, the conditions there were much higher. Considering that the criminal's request was minor, the authorities agreed. Josh said he killed a man in Anchorage in 1994 when he was just 14 years old. He committed his next murder in 1999, and he killed a third man a year later, on the same day that he killed the woman. The first 2 men were identified, but the identity of the third still remains a mystery. Investigators have no doubt that Josh is really involved in these murders. They are more concerned about another question: are there other crimes behind him that he was silent about? In any case, the police managed to permanently isolate him from society and prevent other murders that were sure to follow. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it.